In 1924, something shocking happened during the filming of a stunt involving Buster Keaton. While performing one of his dangerous scenes, he suffered a serious injury that most people would not believe. During the stunt, he broke his neck, but he did not realize it at the time. For years afterward, he continued doing extreme stunts in films, never knowing that his neck had once been fractured. Doctors later discovered that his body had slowly healed the injury on its own. A thick piece of bone had formed around the fracture, protecting it and allowing him to keep moving normally. For 11 years, he performed risky stunts that could have easily killed him, including jumping onto moving trains and standing still while large walls collapsed just inches from his body. These daring acts made audiences laugh and gasp at the same time. People admired his courage and his calm expression. On screen, Keaton became famous for his serious face, which never seemed to change no matter how crazy the situation became. This expression later earned him the nickname the Great Stone Face. Audiences loved how he stayed calm while chaos happened all around him. But behind the laughter and applause was a man who was quietly struggling with many painful experiences in his life. The broken neck was not even the worst problem he would face. Over the years, his personal life would slowly fall apart. His family relationships would break down, Hollywood would turn its back on him, and alcohol would become a dangerous escape from his sadness. While people continued to enjoy his films, very few realized that the man making them laugh was slowly dealing with loneliness and heartbreak. His life was filled with success, creativity, and groundbreaking comedy, but it was also filled with private pain that remained hidden behind that famous expressionless face. The world saw a fearless performer who could survive any stunt, but inside, he was a human being carrying emotional scars that few people ever noticed. Buster Keaton was born on October 4th, 1895, in the small town of Piqua, Kansas. From the moment he entered the world, his life was already connected to the stage. His parents, Joe Keaton and Myra Keaton, were traveling performers who worked in vaudeville shows. Vaudeville was a type of live entertainment that included comedy acts, music, dancing, magic tricks, and short dramatic performances. These shows were extremely popular in the United States during the late 1800s and early 1900s. Instead of living in one place, performers traveled from town to town, bringing entertainment to different audiences. Because of this lifestyle, young Buster spent much of his early childhood backstage in theaters and tents where shows were performed. Instead of quiet homes and normal playgrounds, he grew up surrounded by costumes, props, musicians, and performers preparing for their acts. His parents often worked with other entertainers who were famous in the traveling show world. One of those performers was the legendary escape artist Harry Houdini. Houdini was known for his dangerous stunts and magical escapes, and he sometimes traveled with the same performance groups as the Keaton family. According to many stories, Houdini himself helped give the young boy his famous nickname. When Buster was still very small, he once fell down a flight of stairs but stood up without crying or showing fear. Houdini reportedly laughed and said the child had taken a real Buster, which was a slang word for a dramatic fall. From that moment on, the name Buster stayed with him. His early life was already filled with unusual events and surprising accidents. In one story from his childhood, his parents accidentally locked him inside a costume trunk during a performance and did not realize it until the show had already ended. When they finally opened the trunk, they discovered their baby had nearly suffocated inside. After that frightening moment, they began leaving him with boarding houses while they performed, but the unpredictable life of traveling performers meant that strange and dangerous situations continued to appear in his childhood. These early experiences would shape the fearless performer he later became. During his early childhood, Buster Keaton experienced several unusual accidents that seemed almost unbelievable. Many people who later heard these stories felt they sounded more like scenes from one of his movies than events from real life. One particularly strange day during his childhood seemed to bring several accidents one after another. At one point, he pushed his finger into a machine used for squeezing water out of clothes called a wringer. The machine caught his finger and injured it badly, removing the tip of it. Later that same day, he threw a brick at a peach tree while playing. The brick bounced back toward him and struck his head, cutting it dangerously close to his eye. Even after these painful events, the day still was not over. Later, a powerful tornado passed through the area where he was staying. The storm was so strong that it reportedly pulled the young boy out of a second-floor window and carried him through the air before dropping him several streets away. When people found him afterward, he was sitting calmly in the street with no serious injuries. Stories like these spread quickly among performers and audiences, helping create the idea that Buster was almost impossible to hurt. His parents began to believe that he had a strange ability to survive falls and accidents better than most children. Because of this, they made a decision that would shape the rest of his life. Instead of trying to keep him away from danger, they believed he might actually be safer performing controlled stunts on stage where they could watch him closely. This decision eventually led him directly into the world of professional performance at a very young age. While other children were learning to read or play simple games, Buster was learning how to fall safely, how to move his body during dangerous moments, and how to turn accidents into comedy. These early experiences helped build the unique physical skills that would later make him one of the most talented performers in film history. As Buster Keaton grew older, his parents decided to make him a full part of their stage act. By the time he was only 3 years old, he was already performing in front of large crowds. The act was called The Three Keatons, and it quickly became famous across the vaudeville circuit. However, the show was very different from most family performances. Instead of singing or dancing, the act focused on wild slapstick comedy that looked extremely rough. In the performance, Buster played a mischievous child who caused trouble for his father. Joe Keaton would pretend to become angry and then begin throwing the boy around the stage. To make this easier, Joe even had a suitcase handle sewn into the back of Buster's costume. Using that handle, he could grab his son and swing him through the air like a rag doll. Sometimes he tossed him into scenery, sometimes across the stage floor, and occasionally even toward the orchestra pit. Audiences were shocked at first, but they quickly realized it was all part of the comedy. They laughed loudly as the small boy crashed into props and stood up again without showing any pain. Myra Keaton, Buster's mother, played music during the act using instruments like the saxophone or cornet, and sometimes she joined the physical comedy as well. The act was performed again and again in different cities, often 2 or 3 shows every day. The family traveled almost constantly, spending most of the year moving from theater to theater. For nearly 17 years, this routine continued without much rest. The stage became Buster's classroom, and the audience became his teachers. Instead of learning from books, he learned from experience. Every fall, every jump, and every moment of timing helped him understand how comedy worked. Over time, he discovered that the secret to the act was control. Even though the falls looked dangerous, he learned how to relax his body at the right moment, so he would land safely. This unusual training slowly built the incredible physical skill that later made him one of the greatest stunt performers in movie history. The dangerous stage act forced Buster Keaton to develop a rare and valuable skill. He learned how to fall without hurting himself. At first, this ability came from simple survival. Being thrown across the stage several times a day meant that he had to find a way to protect his body. Over time, he discovered that the secret was to stay relaxed. If he went completely limp while falling, his body would absorb the impact more smoothly. Instead of stiff bones hitting the floor, his body moved like loose cloth. This technique allowed him to survive falls that would seriously injure most people. Audiences believed the falls were accidents, but in reality, they were carefully controlled movements. Buster understood balance, timing, and gravity better than most trained athletes. By the time he was only 10 years old, his physical control had become remarkable. His father sometimes dragged him across the stage floor as part of the act, earning him the funny nickname, the Human Mop. Even though the act looked cruel to some viewers, Buster himself later explained that he was rarely hurt. The key was learning exactly when to move and when to relax his muscles. Other performers occasionally tried to copy the act, thinking it would be an easy way to make audiences laugh. But many of those imitators quickly discovered how dangerous the stunt really was. Without Buster's years of practice, they ended up injured. His strange childhood training had given him abilities that almost no one else possessed. The audience also began to notice another unusual part of his performance. No matter how hard he fell or how chaotic the scene became, his facial expression stayed calm and serious. While other comedians exaggerated their emotions, Buster kept his face completely still. Surprisingly, this made the audience laugh even more. The contrast between the wild action and his calm expression created a unique kind of comedy. Without realizing it, he was developing the style that would later make him famous around the world. As the years passed, Buster Keaton began to understand something important about comedy. During performances with his parents, he noticed that the audience reacted differently depending on his facial expression. When he smiled after a fall, people laughed a little. But when he stayed completely serious, the laughter became much louder. The audience seemed to enjoy the strange contrast between the dangerous stunt and the calm expression of the performer. This discovery slowly became one of the most important parts of his identity as an entertainer. Instead of showing pain or excitement, he trained himself to keep his face still no matter what happened. Whether he was falling downstairs, being thrown across the stage, or crashing into props, his expression remained calm and emotionless. Over time, audiences began to recognize this unique style. It made his performances feel different from other comedians of the era. Most comedians relied on exaggerated reactions, big smiles, and dramatic gestures. Buster did the opposite. His quiet seriousness made the chaos around him feel even funnier. This unusual approach eventually earned him the famous nickname, the Great Stone Face. What many viewers did not realize was that this expression was not just a performance trick. It was also connected to his childhood experiences. Growing up in such a rough stage act meant that showing fear or pain would have weakened the performance. Remaining calm helped him survive both physically and emotionally. The blank expression became a kind of shield that protected him from the world. By the time he reached his teenage years, the stone face was no longer something he had to think about. It had become completely natural. When he eventually entered the world of film, this calm expression would become one of the most recognizable faces in the history of cinema. For nearly 2 decades, Buster Keaton traveled across the country with his parents' act. The constant touring meant he had almost no normal childhood experiences. He rarely attended school and had very few friends his own age. Most of what he learned came from watching performers, traveling on trains, and living in hotels from city to city. But as he grew older, tensions began to appear within the family. His father, Joe Keaton, struggled with heavy drinking, which sometimes caused problems during performances. Eventually, the situation became difficult enough that Buster decided to leave the act and begin building his own life. In 1917, when he was 21 years old, a chance meeting would completely change his future. While walking along Broadway in New York, he met someone who introduced him to the popular film comedian Roscoe Arbuckle. Arbuckle was one of the biggest stars in early Hollywood and was earning enormous amounts of money for his comedy films. When the two men met, Arbuckle invited Buster to visit his studio and watch how movies were made. At that time, Buster was already earning a good salary performing in a stage show called The Passing Show of 1917. He made about $250 each week, which was a very comfortable income for that time. Arbuckle could only offer him $40 per week to appear in a film. Despite the large difference in pay, something about the movie camera fascinated Buster immediately. He realized that film offered creative possibilities that stage performances could never match. Instead of performing the same act every night, movies allowed him to create new situations and new types of comedy. Trusting his instincts, he accepted the much smaller salary and stepped into the unfamiliar world of filmmaking. When Buster Keaton began working with Roscoe Arbuckle, he quickly became fascinated by every part of the filmmaking process. Unlike many actors who only focused on their performances, Buster wanted to understand how everything worked behind the scenes. On his very first day near a movie camera, his curiosity became obvious. After the filming ended, he carefully took the camera apart piece by piece, so he could see how it functioned. Then he put it back together again. Within a short time, he had completely rebuilt the camera more than once, simply because he wanted to understand every detail of the technology. This curiosity would later help him become not only an actor but also a director and creative filmmaker. His first appearance in film came in the 1917 comedy The Butcher Boy. The movie introduced him to audiences who had never seen his unusual style before. In one scene, a chaotic flower fight breaks out between the characters. Buster performed the entire sequence in a single take without making a mistake. This was extremely rare for someone who had never acted in films before. But his years of stage experience had prepared him perfectly for the unpredictable nature of silent comedy. The films made by Arbuckle did not follow strict scripts. Instead, the actors often worked from simple ideas and then invented the comedy during filming. This style suited Buster perfectly. He had spent his entire childhood creating comedy through physical movement, timing, and improvisation. Soon he began contributing his own ideas for gags and stunts, impressing everyone around him. The film was released on April 23, 1917, and it marked the beginning of a new chapter in his life. Without realizing it at the time, Buster had just taken the first step toward becoming one of the most creative and influential comedians in movie history. After his first experience in film, Buster Keaton quickly realized that movies offered endless possibilities for creativity. Working with Roscoe Arbuckle gave him the chance to learn every part of filmmaking. Arbuckle allowed him to observe how scenes were planned, how cameras were positioned, and how comedy was created through editing and timing. Within a short time, Buster was not just acting in the films, but also helping invent the jokes and stunts. His natural understanding of movement made his ideas especially valuable. In silent films, actors could not rely on spoken dialogue, so they had to communicate everything through physical action and facial expressions. This style perfectly matched the skills Buster had developed during his childhood in vaudeville. When Arbuckle moved to a new film company in 1920, Buster was given the opportunity to create his own comedy shorts. These short films allowed him to experiment with unusual ideas and complex stunts. One by one, his movies began to attract attention from audiences and critics. Films like 1 Week showed his creativity and imagination. In that film, a newly married couple tries to build a house using a kit, but the pieces are accidentally numbered incorrectly. The result is a wildly crooked home that spins and collapses in surprising ways. Instead of using special effects, Buster performed the dangerous scenes himself. He believed that real physical action looked funnier and more believable than fake tricks. His films often placed him in situations where he had to escape from storms, trains, collapsing buildings, or other dangerous obstacles. The comedy came from watching him face impossible problems while maintaining his famous calm expression. As his reputation grew, he began directing longer and more ambitious films. By the early 1920s, he was widely considered one of the most innovative filmmakers in the silent movie industry. His movies combined clever storytelling, beautiful camera work, and breathtaking stunts that audiences had never seen before. During the 1920s, Buster Keaton reached the peak of his creative career. He directed and starred in several silent film classics that are still admired today. One of the most famous moments in his career appears in the film Steamboat Bill Jr. In that movie, there is a scene where the entire front wall of a house falls toward him during a storm. The wall crashes down while Buster stands perfectly still. Miraculously, he survives because an open window frame falls exactly around his body. The stunt looked incredibly dangerous because it actually was. The wall weighed several tons, and if Buster had been standing even a few inches in the wrong direction, it could have killed him instantly. Instead of using special effects, he insisted on performing the stunt for real. This moment became one of the most famous scenes in movie history. It perfectly showed the qualities that made him unique as a performer. His films often combined incredible risk with precise planning and perfect timing. During this period, he also created films such as Sherlock Jr. and The General. These movies showed not only his physical comedy, but also his imagination as a director. In Sherlock Jr., he created a dream sequence where a character appears to jump into a movie screen and move through different scenes. In The General, he performed daring stunts involving moving trains and large explosions. At the time, some critics did not fully appreciate these films, but later generations would recognize them as masterpieces of silent cinema. During these successful years, Buster was known across Hollywood as a brilliant and fearless filmmaker. His calm face and inventive comedy made him one of the biggest stars of the silent film era. Even while Buster Keaton was achieving great success on screen, his personal life was slowly becoming more complicated and painful. In 1921, he married actress Natalie Talmadge, but the relationship eventually became troubled. Over time, their marriage grew unhappy, and conflicts began to appear within their family life. When they later separated, the situation became even more difficult for Buster. According to many stories, his former wife even changed the last names of their children so that they no longer carried the Keaton name. This deeply hurt him because family had always been important in his life. At the same time, the film industry itself was beginning to change. Large studios were gaining more control over filmmaking, and many creative artists lost the freedom they once enjoyed. In 1928, Buster signed a contract with a powerful studio, Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer. At first, it seemed like a great opportunity because the studio was one of the biggest in Hollywood. However, the contract also meant that he no longer had full control over his films. Studio executives began deciding the stories, the jokes, and the way the movies were made. This system was very different from the creative freedom he had enjoyed earlier in his career. As a result, many of the films he made during this period lacked the originality that had once made his work special. Around the same time, the movie industry was changing again with the arrival of sound films. Many silent film stars struggled to adapt to the new style of film.